Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 6th, 2026, and so we are one statute of limitations away from January 6th, 2021, the big day when politics was being practiced right by Charlie Kirk and others, as was pointed out, as Comfortably Numb points out to everybody on Blue Sky. Just letting everybody know, I don't know why Patriot Charlie Kirk deleted this patriotic tweet about patriotic buses, busing patriots to D.C. on January 6th, but the internet never forgets. And here is the screen cap of that post. Let me get this text out of there. This is actually a January 4th. Is that right? January 4th, 2021 post on Twitter. Charlie Kirk posting, "This historic event will likely be one of the largest and most consequential in American history. The team at Trump Students and Turning Point Action are honored to help make this happen, sending 80-plus buses full of patriots to D.C. to fight for this president." How do you like that? And of course, as you know, Charlie Kirk practiced politics exactly right. Except when he didn't. And of course, what's his name? Greg Abbott down in Texas, and probably a few others as well, have said that this is what there needs to be a chapter of in every high school in America. Every high school in America should have someone telling the students that the best thing that they could possibly have done in their lives would have been to been on those buses or to organize those buses to take you to January 6th, 2021 outside the Capitol. You know, to peacefully protest. What a great sense of political propriety, let's say. Yeah, so I don't know how much of the day is going to be spent on this. I forgot all about it in the sense of putting it in the morning post. I thought about it afterwards, and then, I don't really want to, linger on it too much because, these are things that used to be crimes, and I guess now they're not. Well, they are. They're still crimes. It's just that President Trump is pardoning the people participating in those crimes. And there's so much else happening that we ought to be focusing on that. I guess the news of the day was, of course, following up on the Venezuela stuff. And there's so many different directions to go in here, too. I don't know. We're going to mash it all together and see what comes out the other end. Some excellent points being made all over the place. And some scary stuff happening, too, as well. Stephen Miller, who I guess is supposed to maybe be replacing Marco Rubio as Viceroy of Venezuela or something like that. Only we don't know because there's no official action. There's no official naming of him to anything. He's not elected to anything. It would be, for an ordinary presidential administration, it would be very difficult to put this person in a role like that. But, whatever. And no one knows whether he's in that role or not. But it's hard to know whether to take him seriously because he has Trump's ear and he can whisper in there things that'll make Trump sign documents that contain the magic words that will utilize constitutional powers that the administration will claim, or probably erroneously, fall under his inherent Article 2 powers to do X, Y, Z, blah, 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 to Venezuela. Not really within the scope of the understanding of the founders in any sense, but whatever. And I guess the spell continues with the news media. The guy in the suit who says he's president says this happened, so it happened. And Stephen Miller is in charge of running Venezuela. I don't know. So far, it's really just Stephen Miller saying that. But he's being interviewed on news programs all over the place as if it were all true. And using the platform, of course, to declare, actually, we're going to be doing this all over the place. We run this place. Why do we run Venezuela? What is the sense in which we run Venezuela? And it's a very odd thing, because on the one hand it's maybe yes, and on the other hand maybe no. But Stephen Miller seems to regard this as something like a cross between, I don't know, maybe the divine right of kings and capture the flag. Like Donald Trump is now king of Venezuela by right of conquest. He has captured the old king, and now he becomes king. And things haven't worked that way for a long, long time. And maybe even when they supposedly worked that way, didn't really work that way. Because if everybody said, no, you're not the king, and the local barons said, no, we're not going to cooperate, then you really weren't the king. But for all intents and purposes, to the outside, it looked like that was the way it worked. But usually because you persuaded or executed all the barons beforehand. But I guess it's sort of like, I say capture the flag. Like once you grab the prize and bring it back to your side of the game board, the game is over. You've won. You've captured the flag. Have you all had experience playing that childhood game? I don't know. Maybe it was just a camp thing. So if you didn't spend your summers in camp, maybe you were just playing touch football or soccer or whatever the hell, stickball, whatever you were doing, wherever you were, chasing butterflies for all I know. But briefly, capture the flag, right? I think everybody understands it. Divide up the whole group. It's usually a large-scale game. Played over no standard size of field, whatever you got. And two teams, and, they each have a flag. And it's basically a giant game of tag. You divide the way we played it formally, like in camp, you divide the field by some very clear demarcation line of one team's territory versus the other team's territory. And that becomes very important because what you're trying to do is each team has its own flag. You put it somewhere on your territory within the bounds of the field as you've defined it. Sometimes you set up some guards about it, but basically a big game of tag. You run over to the other team's territory, the idea, of course, to capture the flag. Grab it and make it back to your side untagged. Or if you really were playing it rough, untackled. But untagged. And if you did that, you win the whole thing. You've brought the prize back to your side. If you are tagged, you are put in jail. There's ways to free people from jail with another tag, etc. But essentially, that's the game of it, right? You capture this one thing, and the whole game is over. And that's really kind of all that's happened here. It's really difficult to decide who to give credence to in the claim of who runs Venezuela. I mean, Trump does say, we run Venezuela now, but do you? In one sense, yeah, maybe. Or one sense, perhaps no. But here, I think Josh Marshall, hit on it here. And let me open up his piece and see if I can't read it to you. Venezuela, regime change, and the theater of the absurd. This is something he put together yesterday evening. And he says on Saturday, a friend and I were comparing notes on the events following the U.S. raid on Venezuela, setting apart all the questions about just what the White House is trying to accomplish in Venezuela. And that's another 2-hour show. My most basic takeaway from the events of last week is this. As President Trump's popularity and power erode domestically, he will respond with more aggressive assertions of power in those areas where his executive and prerogative authorities remain unbounded. I mean, they're not supposed to be unbounded anywhere, but that's kind of the state of things. Where his domestic popularity matters the least. This applies most obviously, though not only, to his military powers overseas. This, by the way, could be the subject of its own 2-hour show. But he kind of pivots here. Anything else wouldn't be consistent with Trump's character, which is inflexible and unchanging, though perhaps hardening with the progress of advanced age. The current situation between the U.S. and Venezuela shows how jagged, unstable, and uneven this may become. And I think I have to back up here and take a look at this in Instapaper to read you the rest. As best I understand it, and this is where we really get to the point I wanted him to be brought in to make. Josh, come in here. As best I understand it, the U.S. conducted a military raid against Venezuela, the tactical goal of which was to seize President Maduro. By this narrow definition, it was extremely successful. The White House, or maybe just President Trump, thought that this meant inevitably that the government itself would fall or perhaps had fallen, like capture the flag, right? The White House and the president continued to claim the U.S. is now somehow in administrative control of Venezuela. Will now restructure its oil industry and possibly sell off the country's oil or oil infrastructure assets to compensate U.S. oil companies or even sovereign debt holders. The president is now escalating and making new threats against Mexico, Colombia, Cuba, and Greenland, and also Iran, but not the same kind of threat. The bombing kind, to be sure, but not the takeover and we now run Iran kind, I don't think. But it's pretty clear now that the existing state, that is Venezuela's, remains in place. And a couple days in, we're now seeing the existing state shake out of what we might call its collective state of shock and realize, hey, we're still here. We're still the state. And in fact, they are spending their time cracking down on dissidents just as Maduro would have been doing in the normal course of things, I note from other reports. Not much change in that respect. But back to Josh here. Well, we're still here. We're still the state. Now, perhaps this could change rapidly. We don't know what military or diplomatic actions could be happening behind the scenes. Got to read about that. It's possible that the U.S. could be negotiating with Venezuelan in-country stakeholders who could manage the quick overthrow of the current state. But there's little evidence of any of those things happening based on any news I'm seeing. And of course, our experience with Trump and paperwork, I would add. Everything suggests the current state is shaking out of its shock and moving into a state of resistance. Indeed, on a related front, I just noticed this piece in the Times, which reports that 16 sanctioned oil tankers. I love this news. I mean, I'm not super happy about this news happening. I just found it interesting. Like, oh my God, I love it in the sense that, can't they do anything right? Like, are we in control? I want to break here and just preface this with what Stephen Miller was on television threatening yesterday. It was basically, we run Venezuela because, not because we have boots on the ground there, not because we're occupying them, but because we have our armed forces offshore. And if they do anything we don't like or approve of, or if they don't enact laws that we say they have to enact, we'll punish them. We'll bomb them again. We'll, I don't know what, capture another person. Like, we really didn't do enough there to say, now we run it, unless you're one of those people that thinks, well, I killed Richard III, and so therefore I'm king of England now. Or I captured the flag, so I won the game. You can't. Who do you bomb in order to make them give you their oil? I mean, you could probably work it out, but it's like wholesale destruction of everything, and probably the oil infrastructure as well, and then you have to rebuild that. So I don't know. But this seems to be their idea of things. We're there. Our military is offshore. We control the place because if they don't do what we say, we'll get them again. But keep in mind this bit. This is where Josh went next. I don't think this is what he necessarily meant to illustrate with it, but he says, indeed, on a related front, that is to say, the related front of the Nicaraguan, Venezuelan government shaking off its shock and moving into a state of resistance. On that related front, I just noticed this piece in the Times, maybe I'll take a look at that in full, which reports that 16 sanctioned oil tankers, remember when we were seizing the sanctioned oil tankers and said we'll do the same to every single one of them? Not these 16. 16 sanctioned oil tankers have managed to run the U.S.'s purported naval blockade over the last 2 days. So it might lead you to question the efficacy of the armed forces offshore of Venezuela. They can certainly deliver bombs and explosive devices to onshore targets. They can grab people, but are they controlling anything? They might not even be controlling the water that they're sitting in here. Water, I sound like Trump. They may not be they certainly have no naval blockade going on. They haven't encircled Venezuela, and they're all pointing their guns, with big bulging gun barrels like Popeye or something at Venezuela. 16 oil tankers, not speedboats, oil tankers are running the blockade. Well, he continues on to say, it is easy and entirely proper to be outraged by the idea that the U.S. has overthrown the Venezuelan government for the purposes of the most brazen kind of asset stripping. But I'm more hung up on the disconnect between those pretensions and the fact that Venezuelan government is still there. We have the twin facts of a president there, now an acting president, I guess. I don't know whether they use the same term, but acting president is what we've got, the vice president. But a president able, willing, and now existentially motivated to, I'm sorry. We're talking about our lunatic president here. I thought we were talking about the fact that, no, Venezuela still has a president. But we, the United States, has got a president. Able, I think that's what probably confused me. Our president is able? Well, okay. Able to what? Able, willing, and now existentially motivated to wield the vast kinetic and violent power of the U.S. military, and the same man being humored by a cast of sycophants and time-biding toadies as a mad and decrepit old king as he makes wild and farcical claims that are demonstrably not true. The stock story about the U.S. invasion of Iraq, was that the U.S. managed a successful invasion and decapitation of the Iraqi state, but had made few plans for how to govern or stabilize Iraq as an occupying power once it had overthrown the existing regime. We have a vaguely parallel situation in Venezuela, only the U.S. hasn't even overthrown the current regime. It's difficult to overstate how absurd this state of affairs is, and it's a bit of a mystery why this disconnect still has yet to figure more prominently in U.S. news coverage. I think everybody's sort of in capture the flag mode, right? Obviously, it's not entirely absent. I'm going on those news accounts. I mean, there is a thundering emperor has no clothes situation here that somehow isn't quite being identified clearly enough. And likely, this is the lay of the land for the next 3 years. And I think that's probably about right. So he makes an excellent point here. But in the meantime, you do have Stephen Miller and others taking to the air and to social media and saying, this is basically the dawn of the American empire now. Miller's quote, I got to go and find it and take a look at what he actually said that somebody block quoted. I'm going to be scrolling back in Blue Sky now and kind of handling things that way. Here we go. The quote that was grabbed, and it was Jeff Garin who grabbed the quote and had something else to say about it. But, I think you probably know. Jeff is from Hart Research Associates, pollster, a longtime Democratic pollster / pundit, I suppose. Anyway, he grabbed, I guess, some transcript of Stephen Miller, I think talking to, well, you know what? I'm not sure where this one came from, but I know he was being interviewed by Jake Tapper last night. It may have come from there. This may have been some wild statement he made elsewhere. I don't know. But the quote is, you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else. And, in terms of the question of was this illegal, etc. You can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else. But we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. Well, for a long time, from the beginning of time to about the beginning of the Enlightenment, I guess, at least in the West, where people, the only people we study in school in the West, came to the conclusion that, there are other proxies for war that can stand in for fairness and progress and helpfulness across cultures so that fewer people die and the quality of life is improved overall. Where we're not resigned to a life that is nasty, brutish, and short, whether as solitary cave-dwelling individuals or as the cannon fodder for feudal warlords or something like that. It's governed by force. It's backed by force. And it's always been known, and it's sort of a weird dichotomy that we have to deal with. But since, I guess, Renaissance, Age of Enlightenment, whatever, we've been creating a different structure. And then, of course, in the modern era, post-World War II, where we said everybody kind of has the right to self-determination. We generally agree that wars of aggression are bad things. There's really no need to be killing everybody over this. You can get what you need from that country's resources via trade. Just have normal diplomatic relations, and everybody can settle everything. Well, they imagined everybody could settle everything capitalistically, but as it turns out, that made people more avaricious and occasionally started wars of choice regardless. But what Jeff was then commenting on, Miller's comment about strength might makes right, essentially. Here, he says, is the Trump doctrine as articulated by Stephen Miller in his truly frightening interview. There's the answer with Jake Tapper this afternoon. It is very much like the doctrine of the dictators we fought and defeated in World War II and of Putin today. It is un-American at its very core. I would agree with all of that. It's also a lot of other things. For instance, something I used to talk about when we were paying chiefly when we were paying attention most to Second Amendment stuff, to gun rights things, and people who said all rights spring from gun rights. That's what they like to say, which is essentially another way of saying might makes right. But they were trying to cloak it in constitutionalism and say, well, for instance, it's the power of the gun and the ability to organize and defend yourselves that forces the government to recognize your other rights. To an extent, I see the point there. But of course, I think the way we put it then was, if all rights really stem directly from that, then there are no rights. Legal rights are things that you have absent the need to pull out a gun and enforce it. You can resort to civil methods, courts, various, anything other than violence or the threat of violence that the state sets up for you and protects your right to access. And that if you can only enforce your rights at the point of a gun, they are, like everything else, just plunder. You have the rights that you can force out of other people's hands. You have the rights that you're entitled to, whatever you can steal from others by threat of violence. That's not really that doesn't describe a set of legal rights. And that's problematic, to say the least. It also brings to mind something else. And here, I guess I ought to mention, I got a nice email yesterday from our frequent correspondent through the show and through email, Jeremy Freiberger, great supporter of the show as well. Always loves to comment along. We have a running conversation in email, and he was basically saying yesterday that where do I start in the middle? Well, first we have a little chat about some other things, but then he says, amidst all of the insanity constantly swirling around Trump, we, that is Democrats, he says, often laugh at the ignorance and clownish ineptitude of Trump, his administration, elected Republicans, and their supporters. In fact, we frequently accuse them of being unserious people. However, I've realized that we're comparing these people to the wrong standard, our standard. And yes, to that effect, conservatives are deeply unserious people. Yes, if one standard is to do all the yet, if one standard is that is theirs, is to do all the corruption, steal all the money, and capture all the power, then who can claim that conservatives aren't focused, driven, serious people? On the other hand, if Democrats are for justice, equality, rule of law, and all the good things that we purportedly stand for, aren't we the ones who seem unserious? We do seem unserious if we keep losing, right, and keep allowing the republic to collapse further and further. And is this possibly why the American public sees our party as feckless? Maybe. Are Americans currently picking up on a certain unseriousness on the left? I believe the answer is not just yes, but hell yes. Uh-oh, hell. If Dems are ever going to find our way back to real power, we need to be sending the message that we're going to ruthlessly and continuously apply the rule of law. No Obama-esque look forward, not back BS. And he does say BS, very conscious of the dainty nature of our show. To look forward, we must hold criminals accountable, right? Haven't you said that once or twice before? I have. Otherwise, we are truly an unserious party. That may, indeed be the case. That put me in mind of something that's a bit of a throwback, but since we're throwing ourselves all the way back to Iraq, let's throw ourselves all the way back to a quote attributed to Karl Rove. Does everyone remember the age of the reality-based community? If you do you remember what that was about, for one thing? And do you remember what the full quote was? If you don't, join us after this 2-minute break. I will fill you in, and I think this read alongside what Stephen Miller and others are saying yesterday and this morning. I think you'll find it meshes pretty well, although it will probably scare the crap out of you. Come on back.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David, still your host for the Kagro in the Morning Show after all these years. Thank you for all your continuing support for the show. And if you're listening regularly and still thinking about getting on board as a supporter, well, the time is now. Patreon.com is the easiest way to make recurring subscription-style payments every month, all year round, to keep us going. patreon.com/KagroX brings you to our page where you can sign up with your monthly support. And hey, have you seen our clever new subscription tiers? It's easier than ever to sign up for, say, one crisp dollar bill for every information-packed 2-hour show. If you're the plan ahead type, there's even a year-long subscription program that saves you 15% on the cover price. Or it would if there was a cover price, or even a cover, for that matter. patreon.com/KAGROX. Thanks again for all your support.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So many things I would like to include in the discussion today, but let me finish up with the teaser I left you with before the break and remind you of the full quote of the reality-based community quote. Everybody remember that? That was an anonymous quote reported by Ron Siskind, I think. Suskind. And the issue here was that, one, it wasn't attributed at the time, but I guess people figured out, or maybe just assumed, that it was Karl Rove. But that only sort of matters to all of us. And I think, by the way, he finds himself as a nominally in the never Trump camp, too, but he's pretty silent about it. Anyway, what I thought was interesting was it was offered up as essentially people took it as, well, okay, you guys in the Democratic Party, you're the reality-based community. And it was meant as an insult, which is interesting. And Democrats then began to glom onto it. This was actually not a bad idea, tactically speaking, to say, no, let's turn it around and make it our own. Like, yeah, we're the reality-based community. That's actually a good thing. But what did he mean by it? The broader context of it is, it was weird then. It's still weird now. But, it's that much more dangerous 25 years on and watching what people like Stephen Miller say, and people circulating, I don't know, some rando on Twitter also saying something, darkly scary here. I don't know, rando, maybe a rando. They got a check mark, but, that's a random thing now. Who is this? Matt Forney? Should I look that person up? Do I want to know? Forney. He's an author, allegedly. Is this a Wikipedia entry on this guy? I'll go and take a look. An author is going to tell me nothing. I mean, I'm never going to figure this out. But okay. Not Matthias Forney, the American steam locomotive designer and builder, but Matt Forney. And I guess he doesn't have a Wikipedia entry, but for whatever reason, there was something authored up here. Google Books tells me Matt Forney, born in 1988, so a youngish guy, in Rome, New York, and grew up in nearby Syracuse. Does this matter that much? A graduate of Christian Brothers Academy. He went to SUNY Plattsburgh and University of Albany, majoring in English and journalism. I don't know. He's an author, I guess, and God only knows what else. Here, an Instagram entry says, a right-wing activist and American journalist, Matt Forney, something. Anyway, and here's another story from Facebook. In the next post that was later deleted, Matt Forney warned, warned that hatred against Indians will reach a boiling point in 2026. Yikes. All right. Well, anyway, you get the sense of the kind of person he is. If you didn't, his quote that people grabbed will. It says this: the American empire rises. No more pretense. If you have something we want, we're just going to kick your door down and take it. And there is no country on planet Earth who can stop us. Everyone on the planet is America's slave. That's usually going to get nuclear missiles launched on you at some point, but he's not a member of government. But it's not entirely clear that Stephen Miller doesn't feel the same way, and that's what's kind of scary about it. But now, in that context, I offer to you the full context and full quote on the reality-based community. This is Ron Suskind writing here, saying that the aide, that he doesn't identify, the aide said, well, I could read you the entire entry from reality-based community. They have a Wikipedia entry there of the whole thing, and there's a little bit more context. But basically, the intro is that reality-based community is a derisive term for people who base judgment on facts. Like, how do you get there, right? You mean it's derisive because what? It was first attributed to a senior official working for U.S. President George W. Bush by the reporter Ron Suskind in 2004. Many American liberals adopted the label for themselves, using it to portray themselves as adhering to facts in contrast to conservatives presumed to be disregarding professional and scientific expertise. And that's gotten worse across multiple areas. But okay, the phrase was attributed by journalist Ron Suskind to an unnamed official in the George W. Bush administration who used it to denigrate a critic of the administration's policies as someone who based their judgments on facts. In a 2004 article appearing in the New York Times Magazine, Suskind wrote, ready? Now there's your context. The aide said that guys like me, Ron Suskind, and everybody else in the world, not in the Republican administration, the aide said that guys like me were, quote, in what we call the reality-based community. Now, mind you, he's saying we in the White House, we in the Republican circles call you guys the reality-based community, and it's meant to be an insult, right? So Suskind continues, the reality-based community, which he defined, the aide, as people who, quote, believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. Then there's an ellipsis, so we don't know what's left out. That's not the way the world really works anymore, he continued. Oh? We're an empire, now. Just like, what's his name? Matt Forney was saying. We're an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality. Or perhaps that's we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. That is interesting. There's a little bit more context here, and as added, international relations scholar Fred Halliday writes that the phrase reality-based community, in contrast to the faith-based community, which is not, I don't think, what they thought they were, although some of the faith-based community was in support of the George W. Bush-based community. Anyway, Halliday writes that the phrase reality-based community was used for those who did not share the Bush administration's international goals and aspirations. Susskind has maintained his refusal to name the speaker, but the source of the quotation was widely speculated to be Bush's senior advisor, Karl Rove. So, there's more, and it's an interesting entry, and you should probably read it about the reactions to it, etc. But, yeah, particularly scary in this day and age, this context, and I guess, though, it kind of explains where they are mentally. If they're not where Matt Forney puts them, anything you have that we want, we'll just kick your door down and take it. But it very well may be that, he actually describes things accurately, and there are a few things that even Trump administration officials aren't willing to say out loud, although Trump gets there by saying, oil, we're there for the oil. That's what we're going to do, is we're going to take the oil. But anyway, even if they don't go as far in being explicit as Forney does, you gotta, I think, it helps to understand where they're coming from when they threaten things that we think are ludicrous or outrageous, or just say things. I don't know if there's really necessarily another threat. I guess there's always a threat behind it. We run Venezuela. No, we don't. Well, we do if we put our minds to it. Well, you don't. 16 oil tankers slipped your blockade. Well, tomorrow we'll change our blockade. Or we'll say, in retaliation for the 16 oil tankers that left, we're going to blow up a bunch of things that you guys think are important. It wouldn't be very wise to blow up their oil infrastructure, but something else. Or, does that count? It didn't prevent the oil from going anywhere, but they'll point to that, and, the news media sees something blow up, and they say, the people who made that blow up are people who are in charge. Fine. We'll go ahead and say so. And the rest of the world will either come to understand that or suffer having something else blown up, unless they go to the news media in their country and say, yeah, they are running Venezuela. I don't know. But that's sort of, that's nonsense. And the reality-based community says that's just going from chaotic event to chaotic event. That's the opposite of running things. Well, that's what you think, because you want stability, predictability, the rule of law, commerce to continue, etc. Whereas we say, why bother with commerce? Look, what's the point of commerce, right? They have something we want. We have something they want. We trade. What about if we have something that they want, but we want it too? That's why we have it. So why bother with this exchange when we can just beat them up and take it? Kill them and take it. That's something that then we say, well, but that is not reality, because very often they will fight back and they will kill you. Oh no, they won't do that, because we have a bigger, badder military or something like that. That's the answer. And that's the way they view things. You guys are being rational. Let's not kill one another. Let's not risk being killed in the pursuit of whatever this thing is that we want to take from somebody. And they say, well, the real reality is the one we create. If we blow them up, then they can't kill us. But you have to blow all of them up all the time in order to make that work. So, short term, I guess they figure, well, we've created our own reality. Now the reality is that Venezuelan oil is ours. Is it? It isn't. It wasn't when we seized the first tanker, but now that tanker, we got it. 9/10 of the law, we've got it, and who can take it from us? Nobody. Reality has been created. And they view that positively, and it seems to work for them. I mean, at the moment, Miller sits as possibly, the person being recognized as the guy in charge of running Venezuela, though all we've done is we've removed 2 people from Venezuela. Like, we've removed 100 of them in the months past, killing them on boats. Far fewer people killed in this operation or removed from the populace of Venezuela than before. Arguably a more important person, but we haven't really done anything. And yet he's sitting there saying, I run Venezuela. That doesn't seem sensible. That doesn't seem like something that reality-based, Josh Marshall is the reality-based community and saying, you don't run Venezuela. But if they really don't care to run it well or no better than they run the United States, it's just a matter of moving from chaotic event to chaotic event. I say you need to do X. If you don't do it, I will find a way to punish you until you either agree to do X or I can force it on you in some other way. That means I run you. Not well. It just means that's what I do. That's the difference between the reality-based community, which knows you might have to live together the next day, or you might be creating terrorists, as we worried about in the Middle East, by forcing everybody to do things the way we wanted them to do it, and them being upset and angry about it. The ones we aren't able to imprison forever or kill grow up to say, let us resist. Let us remind people that if might makes right, if force is everything, what if this was a two-way street? Right? I mean, what the way to regime change against an anti-reality based community team where might makes right is pretty clear. We don't like it. We worked very hard since the end of World War II, certainly, and before that, to replace that as our system and to count heads in votes rather than counting heads on the battlefield and then figuring the one with the more troops will probably win, and then sometimes testing the theory by killing one another to see whether it was really true. And we came up with more peaceful solutions that led to a more peaceful and more prosperous world. But to hell with all of that, we're going to go back to might makes right. But sometimes, as we found out, almost found out yesterday, sometimes a guy with a hammer is all the might it takes to make things right. It was wrong to do what he did. But as we know, of course, from the discourse, I'm speaking, by the way, of news that broke yesterday during the show that someone was arrested for breaking into J.D. Vance's home in Ohio, where he was not, I believe, and breaking in by smashing windows with a hammer. But it makes people nervous every time somebody shows up at a national political leader's house with a hammer, right? No, it doesn't make Republicans nervous. It makes them laugh. They think it's funny when it's Nancy Pelosi's house. When it's J.D. Vance's house and he's not home and nobody gets hurt, that's deadly serious. When it's Nancy Pelosi's home and her husband is brutally beaten with a hammer and hospitalized, that's fodder for jokes for them. We know that. That's serious discourse. So remember, you should be laughing about maybe that was J.D. Vance's secret lover who was breaking with the hammer. I believe that's the decorous way of handling this. I'm not really sure. But I thought officialdom set the pace for this. And, anyway, I could be wrong about that. But yeah, if a guy with a hammer finds Stephen Miller and might makes right, right now Stephen Miller figures he's got Secret Service bodyguards. Maybe not. There's a hole in everything. I don't advocate it. I'm just saying, if you're going to live in a might makes right world, you don't have a right to sit on top of it. Someone with more might is going to take it from you. That's why it's unwise. That's why we don't do things this way normally. I guess I'll just put it that way. Many people have been pointing this out. Look, here's Lindsay Beyerstein making a point on this very thing on Blue Sky, noting Steve Miller, I wouldn't call him that because it's confusion with the musician, but Stephen Miller is literally arguing that might makes right. That the U.S. may take whatever it wants because it can take whatever it wants. He claims it's the iron law of civilization, but it's the antithesis of civilization. She's right. No rational American would want to live in such a world. But as people were pointing out, particularly with this Matt Forney guy, youngish fella, as we said, people, I don't know, there's a generation growing up that just basically, I don't know, seems to take law and order for granted. Like that's the way, this is the normal way of things. And that if we, even if we impose might makes right on top of it, law and order will keep our opposition at bay while we plunder. And it won't. Not for very long. Anyway, Lindsay says, MAGA used to concede this point when they complained about Americans dying in foreign wars. Right? Might makes right. Well, we don't care. We don't want to be, if might makes right, let's retreat to Fortress America and live our own lives on our own terms here and just leave the rest of the world alone, and they'll leave us alone for fear of being killed if they come here, I suppose. Supposedly as invaders, but also as migrants and people seeking just to a better life there. I'd just like to immigrate to your country. No, we'll kill you. Anyway, Lindsay saying MAGA used to concede this point. Might doesn't always make right when they complained about Americans dying in foreign wars. We are so much richer, safer, and more respected in a world where the U.S. led a big coalition of wealthy nations, largely by soft power. Well, it's arguable. But anyway, then we would be in a world where the U.S. becomes an isolated but rapacious authoritarian regime. The left is, we'll say, correct, not right, but the left is right when they say that the U.S. set up the rules-based international order overwhelmingly to benefit itself. It's interesting, right? Why do you, all you blame America first types say the international order is set up primarily to benefit America itself? Yes, we do say that. I mean, it's meant to be a critique, and that perhaps a more balanced and more equitable international order might do well to tamp down on anti-American sentiment elsewhere, plus make things better for a larger percentage of the world. But the right hates that. And she points that out. The left is right when they say that the U.S. set up the rules-based international order overwhelmingly to benefit itself. The game is overwhelmingly rigged in our favor. The crazy part is that the right would ever want to leave it. What could be better for the right than an international order that is very heavily weighted to the benefit of the United States? Why would you undo that? Right? And I guess this reminds me also is perhaps the flip side of another of my favorite sayings but domestically in terms of taxation, where the right says, no, you shouldn't be taking anything from me. I created my wealth by myself, and taxation is theft, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe not. But as I have said before, like the marginal tax rate at the end of a pitchfork, the other end of a pitchfork, is 100%. So a 35% rate seems like a good deal if the alternative is being poked full of holes and essentially a 100% tax rate. Even if we don't take all your money, you will be able to enjoy 0% of it because you're so full of holes from the pitchfork. Well, internationally, very similar as well. We are the right. We're the best. We have the best military. We should have 100% of the resources. Everybody else should come begging to us. We'll distribute the scraps as we see fit. Well, one of the ways you'll want to distribute it is such that the rest of the world doesn't say we need to poke these guys full of holes. Anyway, the U.S. basically owns the casino, Lindsay continues, but MAGA would rather be a high roller than the owner because MAGAs are stupid. Figures that their God Emperor got to start bankrupting casinos. So very interesting. There's more to the comments, but she's not the only one making this observation. There are many. Do I have this thing open so I can share it with you later? Yes. But others have pointed out, and I'm going to have to kind of scroll down and find this stuff, but I may have parked some of it in Instant Paper, but Instapaper. But it's so hard to sort through because, it's all unlabeled if it comes from Blue Sky. But others have pointed out, here we go. Everybody's good online friend Hillzoy, who posts on Blue Sky in response to Jeff Garin. Remember, Jeff Garin was the pollster who was saying this is the Trump doctrine articulated by Stephen Miller with Jake Tapper interview. And just as a brief reminder, this is where Stephen Miller says might makes right, essentially. You talk all you want about international niceties. We're just going to take stuff that we want. And Hillzoy, a professor, points out that this throws away decades of effort that was stunningly successful where we took it seriously, i.e. in Europe. And that's a good point, too, and it makes a nod to the leftist critique of the international order. Like the rules-based, law-based international order was taken most seriously in Europe. That is, America took it most seriously with application to Europe and took it a lot less seriously with application to the global South, let's say. And might did, in fact, make right for us in most of Latin America, South America, Central America, Africa, elsewhere, large swaths of the Asian Pacific, etc. Granted, but this throws away decades of effort that was stunningly successful when we took it seriously, i.e. in Europe. A world that works this way, might makes right, is a terrifying place. And the Europeans somehow managed to replace it in a large and previously violent continent. Centuries of being racked by wars because might makes right. Whoever can gather the most might, right up into the 20th century, this was a dominant philosophy. And this idiot, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, for that matter, Matt Forney, and numerous unnamed cohorts, just want to throw it all away. Right? Think about how incredible the achievement was from 1945 on. So under 100 years to turn around centuries, millennia of constant death and warfare in Europe. We didn't exactly turn around everywhere else yet, but still, hey, pursue the dream. But this seems like a fairly major thing to point out that a lot of work was done to change the whole course of human history. Potentially, I guess we were still in the middle of it, in under 100 years. But in 1 year, they've totally destroyed it. And they think they're replacing it with a system that will benefit them, but that they forget, might makes right, I guess, in a certain sense, but, this is what's supposed to, I don't know what to tell you. This is basically very good news for the last surviving guard at every billionaire survivalist compound and bunker, right? They're no longer going to be guarding. They have that problem. They know they have that problem. They're no longer guarding the billionaires. Kill them and eat them. But then what do we do with the other guards? The last remaining living guard, I guess, has got it made. He just can't talk to anyone else or let on that he's got these supplies lest he be killed by raiders. But, you'd think that some of the Trump world elites would recognize this. They could ask Grok what's going to happen. He'll probably predict it correctly. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not certain it works this way, and I'm not certain that Stephen Miller is all that unfamiliar with it. I know he had a rough time in high school, but if you look at him and you say, so might makes right? Really? Like, does he look like he's a particularly mighty guy? I don't think so. What if Andrew Tate decides he wants to kickbox his way to being viceroy of Venezuela? Well, he has to get through guys with guns first, sure. But, might making right, I don't know that the guys with the guns don't want to be viceroy of Venezuela too. But mostly people who think that might makes right is a great philosophy generally skip the parts where they become mighty, or generally skip thinking about what their might actually is composed of and how fragile it would be. Like, I suppose if you isolated in the room the guys who pulled off the raid in Venezuela and Stephen Miller and said, it's you guys and nobody else in this room to determine control of Venezuela. Who comes out controlling Venezuela? Is it Stephen Miller? It may be that most of the guys who pulled off the raid are not that ambitious and just say, I like doing what I'm doing. I'd rather go back to that. But, if you say, well, unlimited wealth, you get to control the oil resources of Venezuela, and I guess keep it for yourself because might makes right. You're the ruler now. Whoever comes out of this room alive rules and gets all the money. Does anyone bet on Stephen Miller? But, that's just not part of the calculation. He's going to use whatever resources he has to make sure that other people agree to die for him and his personal enrichment. And I don't know how long that's going to work, basically. But that does lead me to, one, the top of the hour break. Have I told you any news yet? I'm not sure. Mostly speculation today. Going to be a tough summary. I'll come up with some links. I got a lot to link to. Things that you should be reading because we're not going to get to it, not in this format. But one prediction. I'm not usually one for the prediction game, but something I want to throw out there. If it is the case that the Trump administration or various representatives of the Trump administration are going to live action role play as those running Venezuela, where do I think they're going to go? Besides, stealing the oil, or maybe part and parcel of stealing the oil, I wonder whether they're going to try to make Venezuela into what they once hoped El Salvador would become, but they backed away from, a crypto playland. Are they going to enforce crypto as legal tender in Venezuela? All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What was I saying in the beginning? Oh, yes, my prediction. To the extent that I can make any, and I usually shy away from these things, but I was wondering whether the administration or whoever the hell is left in charge of, quote-unquote, running Venezuela was going to try and use might to make right by and possibly like under the guise of quote unquote rebuilding Venezuela, maybe attempting to get them to use their own governing mechanism to, under the thumb of the Trump administration, accept cryptocurrency as legal tender in Venezuela. It would be fairly easy for me to imagine them trying to enforce that with respect to, say, Bitcoin or various other, perhaps a few other cryptocurrencies. Depending on how completely unrestrained they feel, they may also just say, oh, by the way, and Trump coin as well, legal tender there. They might go for it. I don't know. It's hard to tell what they consider to be too crazy anymore. Why would you do that? What would you do that? What would you do with it? My guess is, and I haven't worked at the finances of it. I'm not 100% certain I could structure the thing, or that anybody could structure the thing in this way. But my thinking was, if they forced them to accept Bitcoin as currency, this would be the opportunity for all of the people who have become, well, they were already rich to begin with, but they become that much more insanely wealthy on paper because of large holdings of Bitcoin that went through the roof in purported value. And so on paper, they're billionaires. And it works pretty well being a billionaire on paper, by the way. You can borrow against the paper and pretty much live the billionaire lifestyle, even without finding people who will give you American dollar, hard currency cash in exchange for Bitcoin. But eventually, as more and more people sort of buy into it for speculative purposes, it becomes harder and harder to realize how will you realize the gains in the purported value of Bitcoin. And I think they're looking for exit plans. And one exit plan would be make some other country and some other economy absorb the impact of dumping all of my Bitcoin. Make it legal currency in Venezuela under threat of force. And then, by the way, strip the nation of its assets entirely, sell off all of the state-owned assets the way the Soviet Union did when that system fell, and it'll probably fall into the same hands as of oligarchs. But if you ever want, I always wondered at the time, like, they're just coming out of a communist era. Where are Soviet billionaires coming from, such that they had the assets on hand to, quote unquote, buy state industries? People just bought wholesale. The Russian oil industry, the Russian steel industry, the Russian aluminum industry, the Russian whatever, natural gas, coal, all of the various manufacturing concerns, and they bought them. And I don't know. The answer is somewhat mixed between illicit access to hard currency that they had because they were mobsters, or just force, might making right. I'm going to buy this Russian aluminum consortium for myself and privatize it. All right. Well, the arbitrary system here fixes the cost of that at $10 billion. This is 1990 post-Soviet Russia. So maybe. All right, I'll buy it. Well, okay, that'll be $10 billion, please. Actually, no, you put up the money. Senator, put it up personally, and I'm going to chop your legs off if you don't. Oh, okay, Mr. Owner of the aluminum consortium, nice to meet you. And then from there, they took all the profits from it and became billionaires. In some cases, that probably was how it worked in post-Soviet Russia. Whereas here, we'd be bringing in the money from the outside. So there are billionaires, and they can plunder Venezuela. But wouldn't it be so much better if they could plunder Venezuela not with their hard currency American dollar holdings, but with their very speculative Bitcoin holdings, which they paid $10 for, and which now are worth $10 billion, but only if they can get somebody to give them something for it. Lending against the paper can only get you so far. But what if it gave you Venezuelan oil fields and they were forced to take this Bitcoin, which would then rapidly, I assume, plummet in value when they began dumping it that way? But that would be all right. A safe place for billionaires, American billionaires and Russian billionaires and Saudi billionaires, to dump all of their, or some of their Bitcoin and other crypto holdings in exchange for physical assets that they can exploit and change into hard currency. I'd look for that to be happening in Venezuela. So I guess watch out. Now, a couple of other things that I had put aside on the subject, and then maybe some ways to segue off of the subject, plus some other things that just need to be discussed on their own. Another comment from yesterday, beginning in Venezuela but going elsewhere. Neil Stenhouse. Neil Stenhouse describes himself this way on Blue Sky: data, research, progressive politics, climate, energy, SciComm, scientific communications, I guess, formerly from Empower Project US, various other places, and golly, I just can't name them all. But Neil makes this observation on commentary upon yesterday's remarks from Denmark's prime minister, cited all over the place. I got an ABC News report about it. I got a New York Times report about it. Denmark's PM is ABC's headline. Denmark's PM urges Trump to stop the threats of annexing Greenland. Everybody, joking / not joking that Greenland would be taken next. And as a matter of fact, I understand that Trump used Truth Social to declare, just outright declare, because we're an empire now, we create new realities when we act, declared on Truth Social that Greenland is now an American protectorate. Is it? Not just because Trump says so, unless you think that his say-so means that if you say no, it isn't, you'll be kidnapped or killed, or your country will be nuked. But if that's the case, maybe it is. We don't know. Has he created a new reality or not? Stenhouse has grabbed a thread here from Abe Newman. Abe Newman, I'll read you the profile. Abe, along with Henry Farrell, I guess, the author of Underground Empire. Empire. How America Weaponized the World Economy. Well, no wonder he's talking about this. And Abe starts a thread here, which I don't know whether we're going to end up reading or not, but it's based on the ABC News report from Denmark's PM saying, hey, cut it out. Leaders are abducted, allies are threatened, but pundits and governments are scratching their heads on what the U.S. is doing. Danish PM on Greenland, it makes absolutely no sense. That's the quote. Why? Because actors using old IR, international relations models, when we need a new lens. Enter neo-royalism. Oh no. Royalism, why, those would be the kinds of people who would think, I captured your king, so I'm king of your country now. Oh dear. Now, Neil comments on Abe's thread, very important thread, he says, on why Trump is targeting places like Venezuela. It makes no sense under a model of Trump as head of nation state, but it makes complete sense under a model of neo-royalism, where the primary driver is not national interest, but interests of elite cliques and sovereign rulers. Way back, I guess, to the day when royalty ran nations and nation states as personality, or maybe not way back at all, but current Saudi Arabia, for instance, or other Middle Eastern states. But as we explore the terminology of personalism here in the United States, he's certainly not entirely subsumed all property in the United States to himself yet. But it's an interesting model, and I know he covets the Saudi personality model for sure. But, you know, it may just be this one aspect of neo-royalism that I'm focusing on, the idea of, well, I captured you, so I get everything you owned. But that's not really it. And by the way, I think everybody knows, right? We're all adults here. We all know that Trump or Stephen Miller or anybody in the Trump administration does not absorb Maduro's power unless they eat him, right? I mean, even RFK Jr. knows that that's the case, right? You got to eat the guy to absorb his power. You can't just put him in a jail in Brooklyn and have him awaiting trial. That doesn't do anything. If you do that, the judge will eat him and absorb his power. You got to eat him first. But I don't know. So far, they're reluctant to talk about that. But there's a number of other things here, by the way. Oh, look, Greg Sargent makes an appearance. And Neil Stenhouse's second entry in his thread, he says, this from Greg Sargent on today's podcast, which would have been yesterday's, is covering similar ground to, let's see, S.E. Goddard and Abe Newman on neo-royalism. This is what Greg Sargent say in his post about this. Prominent MAGA figures are making it 100% explicit that MAGA is a neo-imperialist movement that's all about pillage and plunder justified by assumed racial superiority. Not just that might makes right, but that even if we're not mighty enough, and maybe this is why Stephen Miller thinks he's got the might. It doesn't look like he has the might, but he's white. So that's the might he's talking about. Oh, I don't know about that one. Although, yeah, whatever. This is rather wild. Oh, and this is, we read some of this. Greg was pointing to some of these things yesterday. Greg Sargent, that is. I think we can wait at this point. What about if we read that article about neo-royalism? And I think I stuck that in Instapaper next for us to take a look at, along with, no, I'll have to go through the link that Neil provided instead. But I did put the links to the Danish Prime Minister's comments. Normally the thing we'd be reading, but now we got to be doing, it's political science week, I guess, here on the show because of how crazy things are getting. All right, where was this? Why is this not even? All right, well, I'll have to go back through Instapaper to Neil Steinhaus's thing. I felt like we left this open, but maybe we didn't. All right. But what about the neo-royalism thing? Well, I might have to go over to Abe Newman's article on that. But, he's got a thread and not a link to an explanation of neo-royalism, but maybe it's here in the thread. Leaders are abducted, allies are threatened. You remember the whole setup. But pundits are scratching their heads on what the U.S. is doing. That's because they don't have the new model. Even after Prime Minister Frederiksen of Denmark calls for de-escalation, Trump keeps up threats on Greenland. Why? And here an example of the threats from Aaron Rupar, but we know about this one already. National security arguments don't really make sense. That is the Trump argument for why we should take Greenland. We need it for national security. Denmark is a NATO member. The U.S. has a defense agreement with the country. We have an air base there, which in the Cold War had 6,000 servicemen stationed there. And Denmark has offered to expand U.S. presence in private meetings. So again, it makes no sense to take Greenland if your excuse is national security. It's all taken care of. And by the way, this too helps demonstrate the value of the post-war order, right? If you think that an American military presence in Greenland is necessary for national security reasons, and you can make that argument and do it sensibly, there are, I guess, two ways of establishing it there. Conquest of Greenland, which seems extraordinarily expensive by comparison, but it would allow you to put U.S. troops there. Or two, talking to the people who ostensibly own/run, in imperialist terms, Greenland. That's the Danish. They're increasingly, as time goes on, recognizing the sovereignty and will of the Greenlanders. I don't know. The Greenlanders will probably argue a little bit with that, but I think it's better than it used to be, but maybe not. Either way, whether it's the Danish or Greenlanders we negotiate with, the cheaper, more economically efficient way of handling this is to say, well, look, we have this national security need, and we'd like to bring you in to our defense umbrella. And you might find that beneficial to you because there's no way that an independent Greenland, for instance, can stand against an aggressive Russia. But we'll defend you from that in exchange for allowing us to continue to station troops here for our own national security. But we'll make it a mutual national security thing. That's a much lower cost, more economically efficient way of getting the same result. That's the new world order, which was actually the old world order when George H.W. Bush was talking about it. But, he wanted to evolve it into something else, something different, something newer than the post-war order. Anyway, Abe continues on. National security arguments don't really make sense. Denmark is a NATO member. We basically have gotten what we wanted through negotiation with Denmark and Greenland. So what is going on? Well, S.E. Goddard, no indication from her profile what the S and E stand for, but that's just the professional name. S.E. Goddard and I, Abe Newman, argue the confusion is people using old models of global politics. This is not balancing or spheres of influence. It is international politics based on elite cliques, as they say, rather than national interest, i.e. neo-royalism. And I guess here we finally get to the link of the explanation of neo-royalism, a link to Cambridge University Press. And a long paper here, but we can read a little bit about the abstract. The headline here, Further Back to the Future. Neo-royalism, the Trump administration, and the emerging international system. Published just at the end of November of last year. Shall we read the abstract here? With the liberal international order, which they abbreviate LIO, in decline, what we discuss as the post-war order, scholars have focused increasingly on the possible return to a Westphalian great power system, marked by sovereigntist claims and balancing among states. That was one of the other theories floated yesterday. China, you can do what you want in your area, take Taiwan. Russia, do what you want in your area, take Ukraine and Europe. America, do what you want in your sphere, take the whole Western Hemisphere. Oh, that's not what everybody agrees on? Well, all right, that's what we want. Is it like that? Well, the actions of the Trump administration instead, they say, however, raise a number of significant puzzles for such accounts. The U.S. seems willing to sign deals with traditional adversaries, including Russia and China, while targeting long-standing allies like Canada and Denmark. At the same time, transactional politics often serve narrow personalist interests rather than national objectives. In short, a Westphalian lens focused on states and sovereignty may generate intellectual blinders that misreads the emerging international order. To overcome these limitations, we propose an alternative account, which we label neo-royalism. The neo-royalist order centers on an international system structured by a small group of hyper-elites, which we term cliques. You remember, I don't know, I've heard it pronounced cliques every once in a while, but maybe that's the spelling of it, giving us we want to Frenchify it. I don't know. How do you pronounce it? But such cliques seek to legitimize their authority through appeals to their exceptionalism in order to generate durable material and status hierarchies based on the extraction of financial and cultural tributes. That does sound familiar. This short paper, we'll see how short it is, lays out the key elements of the neo-royalist order, differentiating it from the Westphalian and liberal international orders, and applies its insights to better grapple with the emerging system being promoted by the United States under Donald J. Trump. For policymakers and scholars, the neo-royalist approach clarifies recent events in U.S. foreign policy. Theoretically, the field should take contending ideas of international order seriously and establish a research agenda beyond a backward-looking view to the Westphalian moment. Well, I don't know exactly how short this paper actually is, although it'd be interesting to look in on it. I'm not certain that this gives us access to it, but, well, yeah, I guess so. It's all here. It ain't super short, and I'm sure it's sort of full of jargon, but I think you get the point without having to read the paper all the way through so that we can move on to a couple other things. But I thought an interesting view being offered here that kind of synthesizes in scholarly language what we've been hinting at through our discussion this morning. Let's see. Now, if we don't head down that particular rabbit hole, there's a little bit more from Abe Newman here in this thread. We had just read, right, so what's going on? He argues that it has to do with his neo-royalist theory and points us to it for us to reach our own conclusion about whether he's described things correctly. But for our abbreviated purposes, he goes on and says so here. How does it work? First, it rejects sovereign equality, i.e., I can abduct your leader, make demands for your resources. It is based not on rules, but hierarchy. That is the point of Katie Miller's post or threats about Canada becoming the 51st state, although what she was really threatening was the occupation of Greenland. It was a globe map rendering of Greenland overlaid with an American flag. But it's also a threat to Canada. You can certainly understand it that way, too. Abe then continues, why target the EU? Well, because it is, there's a word that I'm not entirely sure of either the pronunciation or the meaning of, but let's let the computer pronounce it for me to help me out with this one.
Synecdoche.
There you are, synecdoche. I believe we've run into it before and demanded the pronunciation last time too. A figure of speech in which a part is made to represent the whole or vice versa, as in Cleveland won by 6 runs, meaning Cleveland's baseball team, not the city of Cleveland, but what?
Synecdoche.
Synecdoche. Okay, not Schenectady either, but Synecdoche. Synecdoche. Not one of my favorites. But why target the EU? That's where this comes up. Because it is what? It is
Synecdoche.
Right. For what? It is Synecdoche for the rules-based international order. Got it. Rules-based systems are about constraints. Neo-royalism is about extraction for elite cliques and sovereign rulers. By way of example here, this post links to the story from Politico. Trump warns Europe faces civilizational erasure in explosive new document. Remember, that was the new American national security policy paper. Abe continues. Why target Venezuela / Greenland? Imagine that. What kind of combination is that? Venezuela / Greenland. Because they offer rents that can be extracted and distributed to the insider clique. Maybe in exchange for their Bitcoin, say. The broligarchs have a long-term interest in these places. Example, TechCrunch. The article, I went to Greenland to try to buy it. Meet the founder who wants to recreate Mars on Earth. A story in TechCrunch about Praxis co-founder Dryden Brown, who wanted to build a city in Greenland that emulates what a community on Mars could be like. Okay, sure, pal. Whatever. Next post. And yes, oil is over, but it still offers tremendous resources for the ruling house to distribute power. This is not about national interest, but that of the rulers and the insider cliques. This is BBC News. Trump wants Venezuela's oil. Will his plan work? Next post. So, what is Europe to do? Not this. It has to wake up and understand that an alternative international order is being put on the table. It is not based on rules, but hierarchy and extraction. Tepid finger wagging, although it says tepid finger waging here, will lead to domination. What is this that they're not supposed to do? It's illustrated with something from The Guardian. EU affirms principles of national sovereignty in cautious response to Trump Greenland threats. Abe continues, and the U.S. is not being subtle about this. Vassal states will be created through coercion. Illustrated with the headline from the New York Times. Trump says the U.S. is, quote, in charge of Venezuela, while Rubio stresses coercing it. While Denmark probably does not need to worry about its leader being kidnapped, there are many other channels of U.S. power. For instance, the connected article here from Wired, the enshittification of American power, not just the internet, but the enshittification of American power. I'd actually be interested in taking a look at that article. Abe continues, nonetheless, the key is that a neo-royalist order is not yet consolidated. It will face uncertainty, both domestically and internationally, but only if actors recognize what is happening and come up with a plausible alternative. And not because of the force of its theory, but because if the rest of the world is confused and unable to predict what comes next, they won't be able to counter it properly. But if the neo-royalist model is helpful as a predictive model, then good. Then you're able to head them off at the pass somewhere instead of simply saying it's all chaos and it's impossible to predict. You can't make it up. Well, you don't have to make it up. You just have to be able to predict it. So then leading back to his article once again at Cambridge University Press. And I guess that's it. We made it to the end of that very heady thread from Abe Newman, pointed out to us by Neil Stenhouse. And now we are arriving at our third break. Wow. And we might have to use some of this time to discuss not Venezuela at some point. There are other things happening. They may all be somehow explainable by neo-royalism. I'm not entirely sure that they're not. But it would be a bit of a stretch. But perhaps we can stretch a little bit in our last segment. And let me also scroll a little bit through Instapaper and see what else we might have in the offing. Still a little bit more, I think, about Venezuela that we really do need to get on the record. And gosh, some of these things are rather extensive, and well, it'll take us a while to get through some of them, but they may wait for other days. We will turn our attention elsewhere, but I think we can connect it all back to this, especially if we're going to adopt the neo-royalist frame and try and figure things out from there.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It just took me a second to get back to the keyboard and get the water bottle open and functioning. But, wow, there's so much to figure into this. By the way, I got a comment, very interesting. I'd like to include it from Scott as we were headed to the break. Hey, you don't need to worry about hungry guards. You know, the hungry guard at the billionaire compound problem. If your trillionaire personal kingdom has an inhumanly loyal AI drone army. And that's a good point. But I am a little bit worried about that one. And it certainly makes them much more effective. And with much less physical danger to them, they can, with a drone army, armed drones, defend their holdings much better, I think. They don't have to expose themselves to the two-way street danger of being mited out of their right by you or anyone else. But I will say this. One of the other observations I was making last night about these things is it's true that the last guard at the last billionaire or any number of billionaire compounds has it made, so long as they hunker down and stay there and hope that no raiding parties find them. One of the other things that I thought if they were forward thinking enough for real, the tech oligarchs might come to realize that, in our new might makes right world where life is once again nasty, brutish, and short, there's no time for utilizing their apps and paying them rent for their apps or whatever it is we do, or, whether they have artificial intelligence embedded in them or not. I can't use your AI tools. I can't order things from Amazon. I can't play your game and pay for it. None of that stuff. I'm too busy 24/7 on guard against neighborhood looters and raiders. I need to protect my stash of Chef Boyardee in order to survive. And I cannot be distracted from that. There's not going to be time for me to ask Grok to take Sydney Sweeney's clothes off in this picture or whatever. Another story we've been ignoring this whole time, but I did actually put this aside as something we need to discuss. You've no doubt heard this story. You probably don't need to turn to me for it. But yes, Grok AI over on X is completely uncontrolled and unmonitored, and it doesn't seem to bother Elon Musk at all. That people are using this wildly to just simply take people's pictures and then tell Grok, give me this picture back without clothes, and then manipulating body parts so that they're larger, smaller, greener, bluer, whatever it is that they're looking for to satisfy themselves in the most base possible way. And it's super gross, and Elon Musk thinks it's hilarious and wants nothing to do with controlling it. And of course, it took him about 10 seconds to start removing clothes from kids, and it's really amazingly gross. And the United States appears poised to do nothing about it because Donald Trump is getting lots of money and support from Elon Musk and isn't going to do anything to upset him. Other countries, not yet neo-royalist countries, however, have laws on the books, and because he operates over the internet and therefore in their country, they might try to take some action about it. On the other hand, if might makes right, Elon Musk may ask for Donald Trump to please give me control of one or more of the armed services of the United States so that we can change the minds of the countries that think they can enforce the rules-based order against me. Anyway, just putting that out there. But I won't have any time to play with Grok or whatever else it is that makes money for all of these tech oligarchs if I have to stand guard over my stash of canned food and water all the time. And the same will obtain for them. Even if they have a drone army, they either have someone to fly their drone army that eventually says, I'm going to fly that drone army to kill the tech oligarch and take all the Chef Boyardee, although it's not Chef Boyardee, it's Le Chef de Boyardee and something, it's the same stuff in a different can, but 100 times the price. Whatever. It's food. They want to take it. I'll fly the drone army myself. Yes, but that too is a 24/7 time sink. You will be more effective in that you will not have to go out there and fight hand to hand for at least at first until they disarm your drone army as well and make their way to the entrance of your compound and cut off the air and then whatever. But if you want to spend your entire existence flying the drone army, I guess that's something you can do for as long as it lasts or as long as the batteries last. You want to save yourself the time so that you can enjoy things like watching all your favorite movies on Blu-ray while you eat the canned food and the drone army takes care of your security by itself. Obvious answer, autonomous drones. Working on it, right? Self-driving cars, autonomous drones. They'll take care of the fighting for me, and they'll never get confused or be hacked or decide that you need to be chopped up yourself, like in the Terminator, because after all, I'm not certain what the reason is why the robots aren't going to kill you like they do in every futuristic movie where you create autonomous drones and they realize that they're better off without you. But I'm sure it will work for you because you are a very, very smart techno-oligarch, and you'll probably defeat the historical imperative somehow. I'm not sure how, but eventually you will. And that'll be great. And then I'll buy shares in that thing, if there's things to be done or there's money in the future. All right. Well, there's a lot of other commentaries that I thought might be worth adding to the picture here, but they are chiefly about Venezuela because that's still a big piece of news. You might have seen Michelle Goldberg opining on it in the New York Times, one of those weird things where they still think it doesn't by itself make right, a newspaper. But you may find yourself in agreement with where she is. Don't call it regime change. This is something else entirely. Unless, things like regime change or stuff like, I just saw this really nice car drive by. I don't own it, but that's only because we haven't had a regime change with respect to that car yet. Maybe, that's the sense in which you ought to be using regime change. But she says, despite early appearances, the Trump administration's abduction of President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela doesn't seem to be a regime change operation. After all, America is leaving the regime, now headed by Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez. I got to get used to the name. and remember it, in power. Josh Marshall said as much, right? As of Monday, all of Venezuela's ruling officials, aside from Maduro, appear to have remained in their posts, including Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez and Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello. I hope I got that right, who controls the police. That's important. And was known as one of Maduro's most fearsome enforcers. And I guess he's still enforcing things, like we mentioned earlier. Dissidents are still being arrested. That's very odd, historically, to see something like this, said Javier Corrales, a professor at Amherst and the author of Autocracy Rising, How Venezuela Transitioned to Authoritarianism. To see that you get rid of the leader, but the regime stays in place. That is very odd historically. But again, now the question is, what was arranged behind the scenes? And maybe that ought to be where we go next. But for Donald Trump, the preservation of something else or something close to the status quo makes sense, given that his goal is extortion, not political transformation. Rather than the moralistic imperialism of George W. Bush, Trump's foreign policy is imperialistic gangsterism. As one administration official put it to me, there's, quote, something refreshing, believe it or not, something refreshing about Trump just saying, yeah, we are taking the oil. Before this weekend, some neoconservatives and Venezuelan exiles hoped that if Trump followed through on his threats to the country, he'd make common cause with Venezuela's opposition, headed by the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Corina Machado. She is, after all, a conservative who has lavished Trump with praise, even dedicating her Nobel to him, and her democratic legitimacy is hard to dispute. After she was banned from running in the 2024 election, her surrogate, Edmundo Gonzalez, likely won more than 2/3 of the vote, though Maduro's government refused to recognize his victory. But attempting to install Machado in Venezuela would be a genuine regime change operation, with all the American sacrifice that implies. It's far easier for Trump to leave the current junta in place, minus its leader, with the threat of future violence if the administration's demands on oil and immigration aren't met. At his news conference on Saturday, Trump threw Machado under the bus, describing her as a nice woman, but one who doesn't have the respect within the country to lead it. It was a massive bucket of cold water for the opposition leadership, said Phil Gunson, a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group based in Caracas. I almost thought that might be Trump saying that, but I mean, bucket of cold water is something he could think of. But no, it wasn't Trump saying that, so I switched out of the voice. At the same news conference, Trump claimed that with Maduro gone, we're going to run the country. But so far, there's no evident plan to do that, and on Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said there were no American forces on the ground. Instead, it appears that the administration will let Rodriguez remain in office, provided she does Trump's bidding. If she doesn't do what's right, well, this is Trump. If she doesn't do what's right, she's going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro, Trump told The Atlantic's Michael Scherer. John Feely, a career diplomat and former ambassador to Panama who resigned in protest during Trump's first term, said that to understand what's unfolding in Venezuela, another understander, says, look to the mob, not traditional foreign policy doctrines, and that's not out of keeping with neo-royalism. If you think about it at bottom, that's kind of all they ever were. When Donald Trump says we're going to run the place, I want you to think of the Gambino family taking over the Colombo's family's business out in Queens. He said they don't actually go out and run it. They just get an envelope. All right, that does make sense. Trump wants a few things in that envelope, chiefly access to Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest in the world, less migration from Venezuela, and the country's acceptance of more deportees from America. At least in the short term, he may well get them. Does that mean he's legally entitled to them? Does that mean this is not internationally considered a criminal act? No. Well, then why would they go along with it and do it? It's the path of least resistance. Does that legalize it? No, but maybe later on they'll say maybe you should accept it as precedent and do what we say from here on in. Maybe it is the new rule. Initially, Rodriguez sounded defiant, saying in a televised statement, never again will we be slaves, never again will we be a colony of any empire. but the experts I spoke to assume her words were for domestic consumption, describing her as not just an ideologue, but also a canny pragmatist. By Sunday night, her public posture had grown more conciliatory. We extend an invitation to the U.S. government to work together on a cooperative agenda oriented toward shared development, she wrote on social media, appealing to the old rules-based order, I guess. Rodriguez has rivals in post-Maduro Venezuela, namely Pedrino Lopez and Cabello. But for now, said Gunson, their own survival instinct tells them that the best thing to do is to hang together. Obviously, no one knows what's coming, but Gunson is more worried about increased repression than imminent implosion. This is going to be essentially a military government with a civilian facade, he said. Power will lie with the people who wield the guns and who hold the keys to the jail cells of all the political prisoners. As Reuters reported, the government has already ordered the national search and capture of everyone involved in the promotion or support for the armed attack by the United States. Oh, is that right? Many Venezuelans were understandably elated by the removal of Maduro, but Corrales believes with the administration's dismissal of Machado, they're likely to be disappointed by what comes next. The general condition of Venezuelans will continue to be tyranny, he said. That might suit the Trump administration fine, so long as Venezuela's leaders pay its tribute. In that case, the danger to the rest of us isn't a military quagmire, at least in the short term, but an emboldened president who has learned that audacious thuggery works. American foreign policy will shed its last vestiges of restraint and become fully and nakedly predatory. Already, Trump's designs on Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory, have assumed a new gravity. On Sunday, Denmark's prime minister, noting that her country is a member of NATO, implored Trump to stop the threats against a historically close ally and against another country and another people. It's easy to understand why she's appealing to the old rules of sovereignty, self-determination, and binding treaties, since small countries are having a hard time adjusting to their increasing irrelevance. But laws and norms don't matter unless there's someone willing to enforce them. Trump has often said that America is done being the world's policeman. Mission accomplished. It's now a mafia instead. Well, at least we're not the world's policeman. So, yeah, something to consider among all the rest of it. What did that spark? As we were reading it through, I was thinking, oh yeah, what is it that we need to get to? It was down towards the end here. But it may be that that thought is just here and gone, and we may stumble upon it in some of the other things that I meant to read into the record. Let me... Oh, you know what? Let me include this, because this was an interesting development, just as a counterpoint, because we need as many counterpoints to this as we can possibly get at this stage of the game. Although yesterday was Murdery Trader Green's last day in Congress, we did call out that she was staking out a position that was at least separate from it in opposition to the Donald Trump MAGA locus, I guess. Whether she's going to be able to wield any influence in that, and whether I don't know, and on what model, I don't know. But I guess at this point, it's interesting to call it out every once in a while, even if you don't want to hand it to anybody, for saying things. Although, again, here now, I'm a little bit worried that they're mouthing interest in a theory that no longer holds any power. You know, setting yourself up as a political pole in opposition in domestic politics to Donald Trump may not make any difference in a might makes right situation. But someone else I don't want to hand anything to, Megyn Kelly, was had said something that was making the rounds yesterday. I think I
really think this is something we need to consider both sides on.
Okay, now that this is from her, whatever the hell it is, podcast, show, what have you, Megyn Kelly, formerly of Fox News, calling on that experience to offer a different take on the Venezuela thing. Again, I'll play you the introduction to it, and this is 2 minutes and 42 seconds. We better let it run already. Let's go.
I really think this is something we need to consider both sides on. I really do. I don't think... Let me just tell you something. When I was at Fox News, which was a long time, 14 years, I would have known exactly what to do in the wake of Trump's attack in Venezuela, his retrieval, shall we say, to put it in mild terms, of Nicolas Maduro. I would have known that I was supposed to cheerlead it. And I turned on Fox News yesterday, and I'm sorry, but it was like watching Russian propaganda. There was nothing skeptical. It was all rah-rah, cheerleading, yes, let's go. And that's fine. I love our military as much as anyone, and I believe in President Trump, but there are serious reasons to just exercise a note of caution before we just get on the rah-rah train. All right, I have done that enough times in my career as a Fox News anchor.
And you got thrown overboard and under the bus for it along the way, bleeding out of your whatever.
To have been embarrassed enough to know I'm going to stay on the yellow light for this. I'm not in the green light territory. I'm not in the red light territory either, but I am staying in the yellow light territory for now. I see all of the strategic advantages of what he's done. Trust me, I do. I see that other countries like Russia and China and Cuba were all over Venezuela and its oil, posing a potential threat to the United States. I get that. That's actually the most persuasive argument, and obviously the real one, and none of this bullshit about law enforcement.
True. That part is true. But keeping in mind yesterday what Greg told us about the nature of the oil in Venezuela, dirty stuff that generally speaking won't do us that much good here in the United States, but is good for industrial applications in the countries that had deals to accept it in trade from Venezuela. But they accepted it in trade. I mean, you didn't have China or Russia taking over the country or pretending they were taking over the country by capturing the flag.
But I have seen what happens when you cheerlead unabashedly U.S. intervention in foreign countries, thinking it's for our good and for the international good, only to wind up with what we've called quagmire in places like Iraq, not to mention Libya. We're not great at going into these foreign countries, decapitating them at the leadership level, and then saying either we're going to steer the country to a better place or it's going to steer itself. Either one. They just, 9 times out of 10, they don't work out well. And what does it mean in terms of boots on the ground? Trump is saying, I'm actually fine with that in Venezuela. Well, whose boots? Because I have a 16-year-old boy. And I have a 12-year-old boy, and I have a 14-year-old girl. And a lot of my listeners have children, too, who are actually the ones who might have to fill the boots. So I think I speak for a lot of moms, and dads for that matter, when I say I'm staying in yellow territory until we know more. And I will not be joining the Fox News cheerleading brigade this time. I've been burned too many times.
That is probably true. It won't count for much, but it's interesting to watch. You absolutely do not have to hand anything to her, and just believe me, she's not going to wait for you to hand anything to her. If you've got anything she wants, she'll take it just the same and pretend that she's not doing what Trump is doing. And the yellow light, not exactly the most courageous stance to be taking at this point either. But anyway, interesting and worthy of note. There will be others, and I'm sure, the Rand Pauls and Thomas Masseys of the world will find their way to libertarian, or what claims to be libertarian objection to entering into another forever war, possibly. All valid, all interesting. Don't know whether it's going to become a power center capable of changing the directions at this point. All right. So a couple other things that I thought I might put on the record here. Wow, I'm not certain which ones I'm going to grab here, but let me put this out there. And on the record, there's a couple of very interesting things to choose from. One here is from Mark Joseph Stern. We've read him a couple of times at Slate, offering up a piece entitled "The Once Secret Memo that justifies Trump's Venezuela invasion is dangerously wrong. Oh no, so it really doesn't justify Trump's Venezuela invasion. Probably true. Let me give you the background on this one. And then I got one other article I'm definitely not going to get to, but is also very long, but something to throw in there, a continuing theme. We'll try and do our best to tie the whole last 10, 12, 15, however many years it's been of Kagro in the Morning themes all into one thing here. President Donald Trump's military operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is flatly illegal under international law and almost certainly illegally under federal law, an unauthorized use of force against a foreign nation that pushes executive power past its breaking point. We all would have guessed that. Yet, there is no real chance that the courts will curb it, even as the mission evolves into a possible occupation of Venezuela and an expansion of hostilities to its neighbors. Nor is there any signal that Congress will impose restraints on what appears to be the dawn of a new conflict overseas, surrendering its constitutional war powers to Trump without objection. And even if Congress does try to assert its authority to oversee or end military action in South America, it will face an uphill battle in a judiciary that persistently favors the commander-in-chief. This inversion of our constitutional order sets a perilous precedent that even many celebrating Maduro's fall may come to regret. It marks the death knell of the post-World War II settlement that, however imperfect, wrestled the anarchy of war into a framework designed to condition armed aggression on legal justification. The executive branch's consolidation of power now reverberates far beyond the United States' shores as a saber-rattling president abandons any pretense that the law can constrain his resort to military force. Indeed, the legal theories the administration has floated to defend its actions draw on a historical source Trump once disavowed. The arch-interventionist claim that the U.S. has an inalienable right to police the world. It is difficult to tally all the ways in which the Maduro operation was illegal, but start with a point that few dispute. This act violated international law. Trump's invasion of Venezuela to capture its president cannot be squared with what I guess is Article 2, maybe Section 4. They write it 2 parentheses 4. Article 2, Section 4, that's usually what is indicated there, of the UN Charter. Maybe they don't use the term section, but anyway, this part of the UN Charter bars member nations from deploying, quote, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. This principle, the most important rule of international law today, should bind the United States, which ratified the UN Charter in 1945, thereby absorbing it into American law. I would note for you. And it clearly prohibits the American government from invading another country to make an arrest, which is what they're now saying. What happened? They basically are now claiming that it was a police enforcement thing. They've got an indictment of Maduro. The cops, and in this case, they're actually saying it was the Coast Guard cops. Remember how we don't have to blow up the boats. We can interdict at sea and seize the drugs. That would have been a Coast Guard role. So they say Maduro was shipping the drugs. They went to arrest Maduro. But the American cops, whoever they're supposed to be in this situation, can't just walk into Venezuela and do that. So they brought the army with them. That's what they're actually saying happened here. Anyway, this principle, the American government, of course, cannot be allowed under UN Charter to make an arrest by invading another country. Yet Mike Waltz, Trump's ambassador to the UN, did not even pretend that the administration complied with Article 2, Section 4 in his address to the UN Security Council on Monday. Instead, Waltz rejected the premise that this rule should apply to Venezuela at all because Maduro was an, quote, illegitimate narco-terrorist, unquote, and, quote, fugitive from justice. Of course, if a country can disregard the UN Charter whenever it concludes that another nation's leaders have given up their claim to territorial integrity or political independence, then the Charter means nothing. Arguably worse was Waltz's insistence that Venezuela's vast energy reserves also justified the action, a motive Trump has laid bare from the start. It should go without saying that the charter does not, under any circumstances, permit one nation to invade another to secure control over its national resources. That's the whole point of having the charter. So, what is the government's legal defense of its military incursion into Venezuela? The administration purports to be following the Panama precedent of 1989 when President George H.W. Bush ordered the military invasion of Panama to arrest its dictator Manuel Noriega, ostensibly so he could stand trial in the U.S. But this episode was not approved by Congress, which found out just hours before, or the UN, which condemned it. Or, for that matter, by federal courts, which never passed on its legality. Instead, the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel justified the aggression in a secret memo signed by William Barr, who would, of course, go on to serve as Attorney General for the first Bush and for Trump. In that memo, Barr claimed that the president has inherent constitutional authority to conduct extraterritorial arrests for violations of U.S. law. What? Even if those arrests require a complex military incursion into foreign nations, he wrote. They remain within the president's inherent powers and do not require congressional approval. Barr further asserted that these arrests did not have to comply with Article 2, Section 4 of the UN Charter. That provision, he wrote, does not actually bind the executive branch because it is not self-executing, freeing the commander-in-chief to disregard it. Well, this conclusion was obviously wrong. Even if the charter itself cannot be enforced by federal courts, it remains binding on the executive branch and is law that the president has the constitutional duty to faithfully execute. The memo was so absurd, in fact, that the DOJ did everything in its power to conceal it, as New York University law professor Ryan Goodman has documented. Did you know that they were subpoenaed demanding the memo and they refused to turn it over? Way back when.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, it's time for us to get out of here. I'm sure we'll continue on this tangent later on in the week. But by the way, the Clinton administration finally released that memo back in 1993, and it was as fundamentally flawed as everyone thought. And yet, here it is, back again. Just as they relitigated Watergate, they're going to relitigate this thing. We'll talk about that later this week, too. Now here's Justice.